don't know why they're there. They don't understand what's going on. They cannot understand. The details are too complicated. Ladies and gentlemen, they don't listen to the wake-up call. Those of you who have been listening for some time are much more aware of what's going on. And even on the wake-up call, I myself choose very carefully when I'm going to talk about a complicated concept. And I don't do it often. And when I do, I warn you. I say, look, this is a time when you're going to have to, put on your thinking caps here. You're going to have to concentrate because this is a complicated endeavor. And some things are almost even too hard for me to explain to you because they require a grounding in other forms of endeavor, like economics. I'm going to read a quick passage from the London Banker, which explains in very simple terms why the European banks are in trouble. But I guarantee that most of you won't have the slightest idea of what I'm talking about, so don't worry. I just want you to understand that this is probably the simplest explanation that one can give. But it doesn't do justice to the reality. So here goes. Let me very quickly read this to you. It won't take long. Don't worry. You probably won't understand it, but this is what the nuts and bolts of the complaint that people have is all about. Okay, so here goes. A primary fallacy of the Basel Accord is that OECD government debt is risk-free and requires no bank reserves. Better yet, the banks can count the government debt they hold as Tier 1 capital, reserving against other debt assets. The Basel Accords assume all OECD government debt is a cash proxy being liquid in all market conditions. Roughly, the risk weights of the main asset classes under Basel I were 0 for Zone A, that's the EEA and the OECD, government debt of all maturities, and Zone B, non-OECD government debt of less than 1 year. 20% for Zone A are interbank obligations and public sector entity debt, e.g. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. 50% for fully secured mortgage debt, 100% for all corporate debt. With Basel II, they could reduce capital even further by writing each other a daisy chain of credit default swaps for all categories of exposure. OECD government debt is 0 risk weighted and accounts for a disproportionate bulk of Tier 1 capital of major banks. Well, it does. It goes on. I'm about halfway through. I'm really not going to continue. But this stuff would require me to discuss what Tier 1 capital is, what the Basel Accord is, what credit default swaps are, what risk weighting is, what interbank obligations and public sector entity debt is. And more besides, but you don't want to know this, ladies and gentlemen. I wouldn't have any listeners if I started explaining all this stuff to you. And yet this is the kind of thing that is absolutely essential to understand if you are going to come to terms with the issues. If you asked 99.9% of Wall Street protesters what the phrase European banks need to be recapitalized means, they wouldn't have a clue. How many people honestly listening to the show today understands what the word capitalized means or recapitalized? It's like a foreign language. If you miss one word out of a sentence, however good at that language you may be, you kind of zone out. I've had it happen to me. I speak several languages, and I know that, funnily enough, it's been the better I get at understanding a new foreign language, the harder it is, because the more I feel I'm expected to understand, and therefore when I don't understand it, I feel more stupid than I did when I started. At least if I'm studying a language where I don't understand anything, I have an excuse, and so I don't even bother to try, But I don't think people are going to focus on Economics 101 to learn, about bank capitalization. So I'm afraid I think that, we're going to have to accept that people simply aren't going to get it. It's not just like regular politics. And I did, by the way, get an email from John in L.A., who said in this regard, Dear Richard, I heard your somewhat disparaging remarks about the Occupy Wall Street activists. This past weekend, I spent time with the Occupy LA activists here in Los Angeles. They are camping out in the hundreds at LA City Hall. I found them to be passionate and intelligent, but maybe some, more than others, were in need of more education on the subjects you cover on your show. I attended meetings where people discussed what demands should be made of the powers that be. The discussion ranged widely, but there seemed to be a loose consensus that the demands should relate mostly to the economy and the needs of the 99% versus the corporate elite. If you could advise these discussions, what would be your top 3 demands to the federal government with regards to economic matters? I'm also looking to find presenters who can come to teach the activists about the Federal Reserve. If anyone in the listening audience has any suggestions, please email me at, and you want to take this down, ladies and gentlemen, info@vswar.org. Thanks, John. So again, if anybody wants to help out by teaching activists about the Federal Reserve, you can do so if you're in LA by getting in touch with John. Again, I'll give you the email address. It is info@vswar.org. What's small? info@vswar.org. That is John in LA. All right. Well, let's have a couple more emails. Quite a lot of emails I have actually today. One is from Tony, who says, "Hope all's well with you. Long weekend here, for which I'm grateful. I was pleased to hear you give another plug for Johnny Muller's Expat Files. It really is a fantastic show, full of street smarts and practical tips, and I think illustrative of a mindset people would need to tune into were they to move abroad. I'm sure from your travels you can relate to this. By the way, he told me he started listening to your show on my recommendation and loves it. Yeah, synergy. Enjoy the weekend. All the best, Tony." Well, thank you, Tony. That was nice of you to write in and let us hope that some of you will tune in to Johnny Miller's Expat Files if you haven't done so, with a view to finding out where to go to live. All right. Penelope wrote in just now saying, "Hello, Richard. Are there any countries that do not torture? I would like to live in a country that doesn't torture. Thank you." Well, Penelope, I don't know which countries don't torture, but frankly, I don't know which ones do either. So, frankly, I can't answer your question, but torture is not exactly a run-of-the-mill everyday occurrence as far as I'm aware in most countries. So I don't think they torture in Scandinavia where I've lived. I don't think I certainly don't think they torture in Singapore, unless you call giving the caning miscreants is torture, which some people would claim it is. Seems to work for the people here. Didn't seem to work much for the American who got caned about 15 years ago here, went back home and just created more havoc at home. And in fact, Clinton, who had railed against the torture in Singapore, actually came to Singapore after he had been president, no longer president. He went to a dinner party and joked that that particular person, Michael, can't remember his name, should have been caned even more, and his father should have caned him when he got back. So that was a little bit disingenuous of Clinton, I thought. But anyway, I'm getting off the subject again, ladies and gentlemen, am I not? So another email comes from Thor Tockweiler in Los Angeles, California. It says, "Dear Richard, question. As we go further into the immense depression or mega depression, will prices be controlled like the OPA, Office of Price Administration, in the past in the U.S.? Respectfully, Thor Dockweiler." An interesting question, Thor, and I do feel that there is a strong possibility that they will try to put price controls on. This has been done in mere recessions in the past, not necessarily only in depressions. but they try to keep prices high. That's the extraordinary part about it. Like in the Depression of the 1930s, the Roosevelt administration tried to keep agricultural products high to support the farmers, which of course was cruelty in the extreme, given the impoverishment of so many people in the country. But unfortunately, that's what happens. Price controls, price benefits to sugar producers are already well known in the United States. Corn producers, same thing. We're seeing it already, Thor. I don't think we have to wait for the Depression, which of course we're in already, but what I think you're referring to is when we get further down the line. Jeroen Karelse wrote in saying, "Hello Richard, I admit I only discovered your fabulous and informative radio program this weekend. On which planet I have been. Luckily enough, the people you recommend to listen to like Michael Hudson or the late Kurt Riecherbecher have been on my radar for a long time already. I got a question for you. Do you think people will still resort to internet services when there is an economic breakdown?" Jeroen Karelse. Jeroen, I think that the internet is the way of the future. I think that enormous amounts of business are transacted through the internet, both by suppliers and also by consumers. It's obviously much cheaper to maintain an internet service as opposed to maintaining a shop front, and with all that shop fronts entail, with rents and utilities and the like, taxes. Also, one needs fewer employees, and I'm going to do a major piece on unemployment in the next few shows. I'm not quite sure when. I'm preparing it for you right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I haven't quite got there yet, but we'll be talking about that. One of the horrors of unemployment, apart from the fact that other countries are taking American jobs because they can produce things at a tenth of the price, is automation, which I always thought was going to cause a problem, and it is quite clear that automation is not finished in terms of taking jobs away from people. It is going to be much more of an issue in the future, and the internet is a major element in the business of reducing the workforce of a business. And I do think, Jeroen, yes, that the internet will be a more and more important element in our lives, and when there's an economic breakdown, even more so. That would be my answer to you. Andy Celsius wrote in saying the Federal Reserve last week agreed to shift $400 billion of its portfolio of Treasury securities to try to drive down long-term interest rates. It was the Fed's latest unconventional move, seeking to give the economy a boost. Does this alter our plan of purchasing long-term T-bills? Andy Celsius. Not in the slightest, Andy. They're not related. The point about buying long-term T-bills is simply to protect your money. All we are trying to do at this point in time is protect your money. That's to say, for those of you who are not interested in making money out of the downturn, which we can and do, for the rest of you who have money that you wish to put aside, the idea is not to make money out of that money, but to protect it from the ravages of the Depression. And that will be inherent in failing banks, failing insurance companies, failing businesses, failing countries. You need to keep your money as safe as possible, and that is done through the purchase of not long-term T-bills, Andy, actually short-term T-bills, 90-day, maximum 180-day T-bills. So nothing will alter that particular plan. So there you go. Well, among 10 types of closed and open-end loans, there were increased delinquencies in 9 categories. home equity